My name is Jerome Ferry. My cameraman is Alan Eggers. We're doing a video interview with George Lippisch of Lippisch Design Incorporated, also the son of the late German-born aviation pioneer Dr. Alexander Lippisch. George, tell us when you were born and where you were born.
I was born in Darmstadt, Germany, and my birth date is the 16th of June, 1937.
Where is Darmstadt, approximately?
Approximately...
In relationship to Berlin?
Oh my goodness, it would be south and a little bit east, quite a bit east, I guess, maybe 100 miles, 150 miles, something in that order. And we lived in Darmstadt very briefly, moved to Augsburg, which is near Munich, and that happened to be the main plant of Messerschmitt, and at that point father had been more or less recruited by the Air Ministry to develop the rocket interceptor, and the work was being done at Messerschmitt with a small group of engineers and craftsmen to build a prototype. And so that's why we moved to Augsburg.
Okay. Do you have many memories of your childhood?
Oh, yes.
Did you remember your grandparents?
No, as a matter of fact. And interestingly enough, we had a visit last summer. My aunt came over from Germany, who still lives in the house that my father and his father lived in Jamlitz, which is near Berlin. And she brought photos and stories about my grandfather and grandmother. My grandfather was a painter. He was an artist, and had a studio in that house, and would paint more classical, traditional things, and spent many of the summers in Italy with his class, and he also taught. Father, actually, I think, was leaning towards being an artist. He certainly was sensitive in the areas of music and painting. He was a pretty good painter himself, as a matter of fact. And but times change, and of course with World War I, he was drafted into the Army and spent I don't know, a couple of years maybe at the Russian front, and contracted pneumonia and was brought back and convalesced in the hospital, and then went back into the Army as a aerial photographer. And I think, other than the famous story where he saw the Wright brothers fly in Berlin at Tempelhof in 1906 or whenever that was, I think maybe the aerial photography stint in the Army kind of steered him towards aviation as opposed to going back to being an artist.
Was your father, do you remember him as being a fun type guy, or was he so wrapped up in his business?
No, he was a fun type guy. He really was. He was terribly intense about his work, about his research, but that didn't preclude the fact that he enjoyed life, and so yeah, he was a fun type guy, I would say.
What about any big holidays in Germany or Christmas? Is there any fond memories of Christmases in Germany in your home?
Christmases, yes.
Was that a big occasion for your family?
It's a very big occasion. We had an employee that worked for us for about 8 months, a wonderful lady from Germany. Her husband was getting a master's degree at the University of Iowa, and it was kind of a joy to have her around because I had a chance to speak German with her and maybe recall some of my not very good German. And it came close to Christmas time, and she just absolutely couldn't stand it. She had to be back in Germany. It's a big deal. So yeah, some of the memories I have, we German Christmases, especially Weihnachten, is a little different in that it's a real occasion, and children are of course the big deal. It's for the kids more than anything. But the tradition always was that that on Christmas, of course, Christmas over there is celebrated on Christmas Eve, not Christmas Day, and the area where the tree would be, which would be the living room, would be completely blocked off, so the kids couldn't see in, and it was very secretive. And of course, the parents would decorate the tree and get the presents and so forth. And one of the things that was a tradition, certainly in our house, was a pyramid. And Father would build this thing, and it was always the last minute. It was a panic to get this pyramid built. And it was candle-driven, and with all kinds of things and so forth. And then the other tradition was a train. You always had to have a train under the Christmas tree. It was kind of a neat thing. And then he played the lute, and then he would play a traditional Christmas carol, Ja Kinderlein kommet, and children come. And then they open the doors, and in you'd go. And it was a big deal, absolutely. Yeah, so I do remember most Christmases, certainly. The other big one is Easter, of course, and it was interesting because in 1945 we celebrated Easter in Vienna, and the very next day we fled to the west to get away from the Russians.
What was the predominant faith in that part of Germany?
Oh boy.
Was it mixed like it is here in the United
I
States?
think so. Probably in that part of the world, mostly Catholic. I
Did
would
they have
suspect.
beautiful churches?
Absolutely wonderful. Vienna is full of gorgeous churches. Although I was kind of young at that point, I didn't really appreciate the architecture as such.
Do you remember what age you started school at?
I don't.
Was there a kindergarten like they have here, or you just go right into?
No, I think you just went right into school. About the only memories I have of the German schools is they were tougher than nails, and you had to have, you didn't use paper, you used a slate. We used a slate with chalk, and that's what you carried to school in your rucksack.
That was your notebook.
That was my notebook, right? So I don't recall. I might have been, might have been 5 or 6. I can't recall that.
At the outbreak of World War II, do you have any memories of that? Do you remember?
No.
Did anything stick in your mind as to something
No.
was wrong or could possibly be going wrong?
Well, yeah, that didn't really occur until, in Augsburg. We would have lived in Augsburg up to 1942, and the Allies were already bombing Germany, daylight raids, and we'd spend a lot of time in the basement because the Messerschmitt plant was just not too many miles away, and every day you could count on it. Like 10 o'clock in the morning, the sirens would go off, and there come the B-17s.
Would the basement be deep enough to protect you? Or?
Yeah, in fact, the basement in the house that we were in Augsburg was large enough to house several families, and it was fairly well constructed for, it served the purpose of a bomb shelter.
Did you have air raid sirens that would go off?
Oh yes, absolutely.
And your mother would say, "Get to the basement."
You bet, right now.
And you got there
Yeah,
right now.
right. And then it was even worse in Vienna. When we moved to Vienna in '43, and my dad had purchased an old Habsburg hunting lodge. It was a huge house, but it was in terrible condition. So it took a year to rebuild the thing. And all that while, my older brother would, who at that point was, he might have been 14 or 15, 16 maybe.
About 10 years older than you?
Yeah. He would take the train every night out to the house and guard the place, because already at that point there were refugees coming from the east, and they were looting. And those folks had nothing to eat, and tough times. So he would spend the night at the house and then come back the next day. And one night he convinced me I ought to go with him. And I just scared to death. I mean, this is ridiculous. You take the last train, which is like at 9:30 or something, and you walk from the train station to this house, which sat up on a knoll, surrounded by this humongous iron fence and big gate and creaky gate. And you walk into this thing up the long drive, and the house would be dark, of course. And one of my father's friends had given Hank a Russian revolver, a captured Russian revolver, a great big damn thing. Of course, we were little tiny guys, and so that gun, I'll never forget it. But no rounds, however, it made you feel pretty nifty to have this thing.
It made you feel safe.
Yeah. And this was getting on towards, well, it was either early spring or fall, because the only room in the whole house that you could heat was the kitchen. And it had a big wood-burning stove, and so that's where you'd spend the night. And he'd have Hank had all these booby traps all over so every door had something in case somebody would come in. Just spooky as the dickens. There's 3 stories and a huge attic, and wow, I'll never forget that. But we were sensitive to the war because it just so happened that the street in front of this house was one of the major thoroughfares out of Vienna to the west, and it was called Wiener Neustadt was the burg that we were in, and we moved into that house, and jeepers, I don't know, maybe 3-4 months after that street would just be solid with refugees, and so yeah, we knew there was something going on. Obviously, food was difficult. Father being involved in doing airplane work in terms of military craft. I mean, there were a lot of military people that would come to the house, and then later on, his office, his research institute, or whatever it was called, was bombed, totally leveled, and lots of casualties. And he spent, I'll never forget. I mean, that was a big deal, obviously, and as a temporary housing, they moved it to our house, because we had like 3 giant ballrooms in this home, and so they just turned it into offices. And so we had military people in there all the time from the Air Force.
Would you say that your dad was on a friendly basis with the Nazi regime or Hitler, or was he strictly a scientist in this?
Well, you have to understand, if you want George Bush to support your activity, you're probably going to want to be a Republican. Yeah. Okay? So if you want the German military, the Luftwaffe, the Air Ministry, to support your programs, which it was no different in those days as it is here. You vie for contracts. You put in bids. You put in proposals, and you do that to the Air Ministry in this case. Whereas here you do it to the Pentagon, Office of Naval Research, or whatever. And so yes, it behooved someone who wanted to pursue his vocation, he would become a Nazi. I mean, that's just the way life is. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you buy the storyline. But what you do is you politically position yourself in order to pursue your wants, dreams, and desires. Okay, and you have to understand that when Hitler came to power back in the very early 30s, Germany was in desperate straits, and no political group or party was able at that point in time to straighten the thing out. regardless of what Hitler's motives were later on, he was able to rally the country and bring it back together and put people back to work, and such strength and power, of course, can be abused, and it was. But you can't capsulize and say, well, if you're a friend of Hitler's, you obviously were a Nazi, and therefore you were no good. And that's absurd. So, in this particular case, yes, he was a Nazi, and he certainly worked with the military. That's how these airplanes came about. The only one that ever saw any action was the ME-163, and in such small, tiny numbers that it never made any effect, obviously.
Did you or your dad, did you have any friends, or did your dad have any Jewish friends that got caught up in this movement that you recall?
Possibly. Not that I know of. I mean, we had lots of Jewish friends, but I don't know that, if they got caught up in this horrible Holocaust stuff. But, yeah, I'm sure. My goodness, they lived in Berlin. They lived in Yamlitz, of course. And of course, the German scientific community, lots of Jewish people, obviously.
You mentioned this, your dad had an employee that...
Oh, yeah, he had a Frenchman that was a prisoner of war, but he was a scientist as well, and in fact, he worked for, after the war, he worked for the French aircraft company that did those wonderful Delta Wing fighters that the Israeli had used in the 7-Day War. I can't think of the name of the darn thing, but anyway, he worked for Father, and my goodness, I mean, there was no. He was a educated professional, as were all those people, and you treat them accordingly. That certainly was the case.
There has been many books and articles written about your dad and your dad's planes and his designs. So maybe we could move into when things started to take a turn for the worst. Where were your dad, and when was the time your dad probably made a decision that we're going to have to do something different here?
Yeah, that would have been the spring of '45. My mother, actually my stepmother, my mother passed away. I think I was a year old, but my stepmother had lived in Russia. It would have been after the revolution, but they knew. I mean, that's just no place to be, and you certainly didn't want to be involved with the communists in any form, and certainly not in Russia. It was just unthinkable. So the idea was to stay in the West somehow, and of course, all the scientists, all the guys involved in whatever, designing airplanes or weaponry or whatever the heck they were doing, the Americans had a pretty good handle on where they were and who they were, and so did the Russians. And because it's hard to imagine unless you've been through it. You can't imagine that suddenly you're no longer America. I mean, it's that sudden. It doesn't happen over a long period of time. It's just one day, bingo, it's over. And because the German army certainly couldn't withstand the Russian onslaught in the east, I mean, they took the country by storm. And if you didn't have some warning, there's no way you could get out of there. And so some of the scientists obviously were captured by the Russians and went on to do work for the Russians. One in particular was a fellow by the name of Tank, who worked for Focke-Wulf and helped work on the 190, and also had some advanced ideas on jet aircraft and so forth. And I think he ended up at working with and helping to develop the MiG. The MiG-15 is partly his design. So not everybody went to the West. Some guys, too bad, they ended up working for the Russians. But anyway, the Americans gathered all these folks together and said, hey, you're, in essence, because you worked for the military and you developed weaponry, you're kind of a prisoner of war in a sense. But we're going to treat you like scientists. But we're going to debrief you, and we're going to take you to the United States like you were a prisoner. And they took him to first to Paris and then to London for debriefing, and then ended up in Long Island, and then assigned them tasks, if you will, and you had the choice. You had to, I think, more or less, they had to work for the government for about 3 years, and then if you wanted to go back to Germany, you could. Now, not everybody was considered, and this project was called Project Paperclip, but, for instance, Messerschmitt didn't come over here. He stayed in Germany. The Dornier folks stayed in Germany. So I'm not clear as to exactly how that all worked. Maybe it's the Americans decided they only wanted certain of the scientists to come over here. But we kind of figured that at Easter time it was time to leave. Well, you brought up that the business with the wood burning automobile. Okay, well, gasoline was about impossible to get because it was strictly used for the war effort. And so we had cars, but you couldn't drive them because there's no gas. And the other thing is, you really had to, if you weren't, if you were a doctor or like in Father's case, you could keep your tires, but otherwise you had to give your tires away too. So I mean, we had a phenomenal automobile sitting in our gatehouse or whatever it was, but no tires. So,
you were separated from your dad at this time.
Yeah. What happened was that he wanted to make sure that his people got out of there, but he also wanted to make sure that we got out of there. So the wood burning Opel was not ready. Okay, it wasn't functional at this point. So what they did is they took some of our household goods, and they on a truck, and then hooked the Opel on the back of the thing, and then we were in the Opel, and that's how we headed out of Vienna.
Did your mother have to make these plans, or was your dad able to?
Oh, Father was involved, obviously, because his company helped get the thing going, and, got us together. And then we had some friends along the way, and that's where we could stop and spend the night and that kind of thing.
At that time, did your mother know you were headed to America?
No, I'm sure she didn't. Well, I'm not. No, at this point, no. That didn't happen till later. Father did go to, as you said earlier, it wasn't a chalet. It was a mountain cabin. Okay, and where he kind of made a decision as to what to do. And at the same time, he wanted to make darn sure he wasn't going to get involved with the Russians. I mean, he got out of Vienna he got out of Vienna the night before the Russians occupied Vienna. He almost didn't get out of there because the Nazis, and this is true, the Nazi soldiers, whatever battalion, was stationed in Vienna and guarding the perimeter. And they weren't going to let him out of there. And he had to do some pretty fast talking. And he managed it. And he had a car that ran on. He had the car that actually did run on wood, charcoal. So that's Then from there he went to my mother knew where he was, obviously, and the Americans made contact with with him through somebody. I can't remember exact details, but then he decided to join them, if you will, and I suppose that's when they decided that they would come to the United States.
Okay. So tell us about an 8-year-old boy coming to America.
No, well, what excitement! We, my sister's brother and mother came over on a Liberty ship, and we spent 2 years in Landshut, again near Munich, and with all the other families of scientists, and finally we got word that we were going to come to the United States, and so then they transported us to I can't remember the name, the harbor. But anyway, from there we took a Liberty ship to England and stopped there for overnight, and then headed to the United States. It took us like 7 days to cross the Atlantic or some god awful long time. Arrived in New York, in the classic, like you've seen in the movies, like everybody knows, you see the Statue of Liberty and the whole bit, and I mean, it's pretty exciting stuff.
Eyes that big around.
Oh yeah, just awesome. And my father met us at the boat docked at a naval yard in New York, and I can't remember the name, but anyway, he met us there, and then he had bought a house in Woodbury Heights, New Jersey, and so we took the train from New York to Hamden, and then he had a friend pick us up in a car and drive us to the house. And probably the most memorable, interestingly enough, we have a whole herd of deer, and they're just milling around out here. My wife is waving at me. But we got on the train, and my gosh, down the aisle of the train comes this porter with a cart with orange juice and candy bars and you name it. This is the first time we'd ever seen anything like this. Wow, was that ever impressive? I thought, boy, we have come to the land of milk and honey. But as an 8-year-old, it's pretty impressive stuff. And so anyway, then we lived in Woodbury Heights for, I think, 3 years. Father was involved with the Philadelphia Naval Yard. That's where they put him. And once that stint was up, then Arthur Collins had gotten in touch with him, and because Arthur was thinking about expanding his company into the aircraft business, and so that's how we ended up in Cedar Rapids.
You were telling me earlier about your trip to Cedar Rapids.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, this was in 1950, and we had a 1947 Chrysler Windsor 4-door. I mean, my older brother and I both were kind of goofy about cars, and gosh, you come to the United States and that's all there are, cars. I mean, it's just everybody has a car. It's just awesome. And well, in fact, I can remember even in Germany when Germany surrendered, we were in Taunkirchen, a little town, kind of a resort town. Had some friends there and so forth. And you would see the American officers, for instance. They'd have these Dodge business coupes that were, I mean, in Europe everything is relatively small, and here are these cars that are monsters. And you go, wow, what? So anyway, we left Woodbury Heights with our personal stuff in this car, and we're going to drive to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And, I mean, we're clueless as to where this is, first of all, and we know it's somewhere past Chicago. And the only 4-lane road in those days was the Pennsylvania Turnpike, which ended in Pittsburgh. And so we took the Turnpike to Pittsburgh and got horribly lost, and it was just an unbelievable trip. But then you leave Chicago, and it's Highway 30 all the way, and then you come to the Mississippi River, and I mean, this is, wow, it's the Mississippi River. Here we are. and you cross over, and we are now in the Wild West. I mean, there's nothing. Okay, it's cornfields, yes, and narrow two-lane highway, and you go, where are we going? It's Indian country, you know. It's really something. But yeah, and then Father met us in Mount Vernon, and Arthur had given him a 1942 Buick Roadmaster that Arthur had driven all through the war. And I mean, this is the biggest boat you've ever seen in your life. And so my sisters and I jumped into Father's car and my mother, and Hank drove the other car, and came into Cedar Rapids. And wow, you know, we're living in the Wild West. But things have changed dramatically since then, believe me. But it's interesting because here we live now, just off of Mount Vernon Road, which is old Highway 30, and they keep trying to reconstruct the thing, and you know, it's kind of a shame in the sense that when I remember the original Highway 30, it was pretty peaceful out here, and you know, it wasn't the terrible traffic jams that we have today.
Could you speak English at this time?
No. Well, I should. I'll take that back. We couldn't speak English when we came to the United States, but when we came like in, well, it would have been the end of May. And my mother taught us English. She was a linguist. She could speak 5 different languages and had studied and so on. And so she taught us English in the summer. We were able to speak English by the end of the summer, so we could go to school. And but New Jersey has a state law that immigrants would have to go back 1 year in school because of the language problem, and it's probably just as well, because you know, it took us another year to fully appreciate the language.
Did your mother enroll you in school in the fall in Cedar Rapids here?
No. This was in New Jersey.
No, when you got to Cedar Rapids, did she enroll you in school?
Oh, sure.
The first year?
Oh, well, yeah. I started, when I came to Cedar Rapids, I was in the 7th grade at Franklin. So, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Did you find it hard to adjust?
To Franklin?
The American ways, I mean, in
no, not
the
really.
speech and the...
Not really, no. Not at all. How do I say it? Probably the difference is the discipline and the order of things is in terms of you know, if I mean, essentially a German family is relatively strict in its pecking order as to who gets to do what and who has authority and so on. Whereas when you come to the United States, things are kind of lax and loose, and the kids do whatever the hell they want to do. You know, I think that was an eye-opener in New Jersey.
Plus, didn't you go through school year-round in Germany, or didn't they work that a little different?
No, they had vacation.
Didn't they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we had vacation. Of course, you know, I started school, I can't remember when. But because of the air raids and you know, we moved twice and so forth, it was pretty fragmented, my early years in school. In fact, I don't remember, probably the only thing I really remember is Augsburg, because I can't remember school in Vienna, and I know we went to school in Vienna. But it was pretty hectic because of air raids.
You were old enough when, after you got to America and you got to Cedar Rapids, can you recall or remember what your mother's feelings were? Did she seem to start accepting the life in America? Did she?
No, she had a hard time with that. The thing you have to understand is that in Germany we were fairly well off. We had maids, we had cooks, we had drivers, we had the whole shooting match, and so did my mother when she grew up. her father was a civil engineer and had done quite well, and they lived in Spain. She graduated from college in Barcelona. And when we came here, we were dirt poor. The father's money was gone. The German mark was devalued to the point where it was worthless, and you had script, and we lost most of our goodies in Vienna, and it was tough times.
So she probably felt like a pioneer.
She felt like a pioneer. She was I think she was terribly disappointed at first. Suddenly you got to cook, and you got to clean house, and you got to do all that stuff, okay? And you're not used to it. She didn't accept. The other thing I think that surprised all of us, and certainly because she was very traditional in her ways, was how open people are here, and how willing they are to help, and they want to know about you, and there's no reluctance to visit about personal things and so forth, and that bothered her for a long time. It was hard for her to get used to that openness. One of our good friends early on were the Wilders, and Ruth was really a nifty lady, and Tudor was the classic Midwestern Westerner, and nothing was off limits to Tudor, and the mother could never kind of get used to that idea. So yeah, that was totally different, but she finally, I think, got used to the American ways of friendship and so on, and both of them really liked it here. They really did. In fact, they didn't want to move back. They went back for a couple of years. Father had a contract with a company called Rheinflug in eastern or western Germany, almost on the Dutch border. They were building a ground effect boat, much like the one that had been developed at Collins Radio, under a contract from the German Coast Guard, and as an offshore patrol vehicle. And then later on, he had a contract with Dornier to continue the Aerodyne work, which is a vertical takeoff and so forth device. So they spent, maybe 2.5, 3 years over there, and lived on the Lake of Constance in a nifty little town, and of course loved it and all. But they really didn't want to stay. They wanted to come back. They came back to the United States.
Was when they went back, was that how long after the war had ended?
Oh, they had gone back for one other. Father had gone back because of a commemorative thing for the Old Eagles, I think they called them. They were all the people involved in the aircraft industry. And
would Germany have been rebuilt yet?
Oh yeah, definitely. This would have been in the early '60s, and then there was something at the Rhön Mountains where the glider activity went on, and they commemorated the statue for him or something, and then so when he went back to stay for a while was in the late '60s and early '70s. Although they're both buried there now. Mother, when Father passed away, Mother took his ashes back to Germany and bought a site and had a stone put in and a plaque and so on. And then when she passed away, she wanted her ashes there as well. So yes, it's their homeland, but in terms of living, I think they really enjoyed it in the United States.
You mentioned your brother Hank. He would have been about 10 years older than you were.
Right.
Did he get caught up in the Hitler youth movement?
Oh, sure. He was a big supporter. That was a big deal.
For a young person to be given that responsibility, I can imagine that made him feel very...
oh, yeah, and there was a lot of activity, lots of things to do. In fact, he got involved because he wanted to be a pilot, and the youth movement had a program for training young people to become pilots, as glider pilots first, and then you would graduate into the military as a fighter pilot. And that was all interrupted by the end of the war. And he was drafted into the Army and became a machine gunner. Unbeknownst to him. But anyway, that's how he ended up. And he was wounded and captured, and we finally met up again. Probably 6-8 months after the war had ended, we found him, or he found us, and we all came to this country together.
You mentioned the fact that he wanted to be a fighter pilot. We interviewed a Grant Bremel this spring. He used to fly fighter escort over Germany,
Mm-hmm.
and he was relating the story that he was flying at 33,000 feet, and he looked out the top of his cockpit, and he seen this thing going about 10,000 feet over him, and it just scared the living daylights out of him. They had no idea what it was. Years later, they found themselves next door neighbors to Alex and Gertrude Lippisch.
Is that right?
The man that designed the ME 103.
I'll be darned.
163.
163, right? Yeah.
I thought that was a very interesting story.
Absolutely.
I called him last night to ask him to make sure that I had heard it right, and he said yes.
I'll be darned.
He was very good friends of your folks.
Huh. What was his name?
Grant Bremel. He was a P-51 fighter pilot.
Okay. Huh. Neat. Yeah. Yeah, well, that it opened a lot of eyes, but it didn't do much in the way of, it didn't really help the war.
What is some of the projects, George, that your dad worked on here in Cedar Rapids itself? Just
Okay, well, originally when he first came to Collins Radio, he continued his research on delta wing aircraft. He had, during the time that he was, I called him an indentured servant as a result of that paperclip business, he visited probably all of the aircraft companies, certainly Lockheed and Consolidated Vultee and a couple others I can't remember, but and they were very interested in his delta wing work. But Father was kind of a loner. He didn't want to get involved with the American aircraft companies as just another guy. He wanted to continue what he wanted, what he thought was important, and he wanted to continue his research. And when he came to Collins, he also managed to get a contract from the Navy to continue that program. And so the first several years here, he worked on the delta wing, which would have been a continuation of this concept. And that kind of ended in I would say in the latter 50s, maybe early 60s, and then they did some all kinds of research, if you will. And out of that came the Aerodyne, which was a vertical takeoff and hovering craft, wingless, and but it was never nothing beyond basic R&D. And then he also, in the meantime, did some work on wind tunnels, developed a wind tunnel for universities and high schools, demonstration tunnels, that kind of thing. And at that time, Mr. Collins had he wanted to get involved in the boat business as well. Not commercially, but he wanted a new yacht. He was tired of the yacht that he had. And in fact, he was so disappointed with that thing, and he kept it down in Florida somewhere, and so he said, Alex, we're going down to Florida this weekend. I want you to take a look at that boat, and we got to do something better. Well, they were out with like I think the chief financial officer and a couple other guys, and Arthur and Father. They were down on this. They're on this boat out in the Atlantic, and they hit and it was a terrible boat. It was a Huckins, and it was horrible. It was rougher than it can be, and they hit a lobster buoy and stove the hull in, and things started to sink. And Arthur's on the radio calling Mayday and so forth and so on, and Father is in the fantail movieing this whole thing. The whole deal is a 60 millimeter film. But that convinced them all that there can be lots done with boat hull design, and of course it's hydrodynamics and aerodynamics are very similar. So they established a research lab at 35th Street with a huge tow tank, probably state-of-the-art, beautifully done, and started measuring the efficiencies of all the hulls that were out in the market at the time, and put together a huge research paper. And out of all of that came a new hull design, which was essentially a deep V hull with whatever and so forth. And then they built a prototype and sent it down to Florida and tested it, and it was beautiful. And so then Arthur ended up building an 84-footer out in Newport Beach, and I happened to get involved and help design the superstructure on that thing. But during that project of measuring and documenting what had been done in hull design, he got involved in this not hovercraft, but ground effects boat. And they ended up building a prototype, and they flew it at Coralville. It's now hanging in the EAA Museum in Oshkosh. And that then, that program kind of died at that point. Father retired. He had a problem. He had a lung removed in '64. He had, and it was really not cancer. It related to his injury in World War I. And so after recovering, he formed his own company called Lippisch Research Corporation, and pursued the business in Germany. And at the same time, got a contract with Kiefer Mercury to develop a unlimited outboard race boat, and because they were having problems with their hydroplanes, they're dangerous as the dickens, unstable. And Carl Kiefer thought, gee, this ground effects boat might just be the answer. And so, as he was leaving to go to Germany, he made a deal with Kiefer at O'Hare. He was about to get on his airplane, and then I got involved. I kind of managed that program while he was overseas, and we built a prototype and we flew it, and it worked nicely. And so that's how I got involved in business. As a matter of fact, it was through that. It was kind of a contract that I had that gave me the ability to do other things.
What year are you talking about? It's nice to have this down.
Oh yeah, I'm talking 1960. We started that program in 1967. And I was with it until about 72. And Father continued to do development work for this outboard powered race boat until I think 74, when the oil crisis shut down the outboard and boat business almost completely. And so Kiefer had to cut back, and that ended that activity. And that's how he met. That's how Ralph Driscoll got involved. We hired Ralph originally to build the first test boat, and so that would have been in '67. So Ralph knew Father from '67 on, and then after I got out of the Father built just a marvelous studio out at his place, and so they built boats in there, and he hired Ralph as his builder, along with my younger brother.
Ralph has very high praise for your father.
Well, he enjoyed that time. I mean, it was idyllic. You couldn't find a better job.
So when did you decide what you wanted to do with your life?
Oh, gee, I don't know. I think probably about that time.
Was there computers at that time?
No. Oh, no. No, I mean, probably the fanciest you could get was a Texas Instrument calculator. Yeah.
So all design was done on a...
Well, it was done with a slide rule on a drawing board. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, Father would have been. I mean, he wouldn't be able. He wouldn't believe what he could have done with a computer. It really revolutionized everything.
So, so tell us about what's your business. We could maybe bring your wife in now, and you can
Sure,
introduce
Jerry.
your wife. George, introduce your wife to us.
Jerry Lippisch. Actually, her name's Geraldine, but we nickname her Jerry. And we been married for. We just decided it was 38 years. It's awful. I can never remember. Married in 1963, and how
Any
many
children, Jerry?
Talk about
Yes,
our
we
children.
do have 3 children, 3
Yeah.
boys. The oldest one is 34. He
Yeah.
lives in Kansas City. The 2 younger boys are in Las Vegas, Nevada. One still goes to school. The youngest one's 25 and still in school. They're enjoying it. In fact, they enjoy it so well they don't come to Iowa to see us.
Well, you know, our middle son, Mark, started at the University of Iowa and wasn't real sure what his major would be, and he changed it about 14 times, and finally decided that he wanted to be in the hotel business, and so what little we knew about schools that offered hotel management and that kind of thing, well, Las Vegas, UNLV is the school. So we said, okay, Mark, if you're really serious about this stuff, then you go to UNLV. And he's fine. So we investigated it and got in and so on, and lived there, lived off campus for the first year, and wasn't too excited about that. And we kind of agreed that what we ought to do is get a place in Las Vegas, and so he would have a place to stay, and we'd have a place to stay when we wanted to go on vacation, which was fine. And then our youngest son, when he graduated from high school, he got an appointment to the U.S. Naval Academy, and spent 2 years at the Naval Academy and really didn't like it. Didn't like it at all. So he resigned, and you can do that after 2 years without any obligation. And then he kind of migrated. He came back here to Cedar Rapids and decided, boy, this is a bummer. He wanted to go where things were happening, so to speak. So he slowly migrated west, ended up in Flagstaff, lived there for a while, and then his brother, of course, was living in Las Vegas, and he visited Las Vegas several times and finally decided, gee, this may be a cool place to be. And so now they both live in this condo. And so when we go out there, we have to get a hotel room.
That sounds typical. What was his name?
Carl.
Carl?
Carl.
Is he married?
No.
Just the oldest one is married.
Okay. You had 2 children?
3.
3? Name the other one. Don't leave
Oh,
anybody
don't
out.
leave right out. Okay, the middle boy is Mark. He's the one that first moved out to Las Vegas, and then Carl joined him out there.
And they're both single.
Enjoying their life.
Yeah. And Kurt, our oldest, is married, and to a lovely wife who is getting her PhD at the University of Kansas. And Kurt was going to be kind of taking over our business, but when love comes first, obviously, and so she'll be in Kansas for another 2 or 3 years, and so they obviously moved down there. And we see them occasionally. They're close enough that we can get together. But the 2 guys in Vegas, they come to Iowa with this horrendous humidity in the summer and this terrible temperature in the wintertime, and they just can't handle it. It just, their blood's too thin. They love it out west.
So what does Mom and Dad do?
Well, Mom and Dad kind of just run the business. And
Tell us about your business.
Oh, it's graphic design, advertising, and it's very interesting. Keeps us busy and keeps us off the streets.
We have some very nice accounts.
In a few words, can you tell us what graphic designs would mean to somebody? What type, do you do a product or?
I don't think you call it a product. It's
Well,
anything with printing is.
yeah, graphic design is kind of a misnomer in the sense that most of our business is shall I say, collateral material. It's literature of some type to explain or to excite a potential customer, explain to or excite a customer about a product. So we do that. We do advertising. We do mostly print advertising. We have a couple of accounts where we place the ads. We design a campaign, and then we place the ads for them, produce them as well. Because we really kind of consider ourselves designers, and so we also do product design. One of our accounts makes fireplaces, and so we help design the fireplace. We do the fronts, the trim, and that kind of thing. We've designed a company that we used to do a lot of design work for on the industrial side was Lippisch Corporation in Cedar Rapids, and I think I did most of the products that they produced in terms of styling and the visual design of the product. And so graphic design would, yes, we do corporate logos, we do yeah, right, and annual reports, corporate materials.
You have your business here in your home.
Yes, we do. Just recently.
Do you find this has any disadvantages of having your business in your home?
No disadvantages. I do not think so. I think you have a bad habit of getting too lax sometimes. That would be the biggest problem.
You can always find a diversion.
Do you find yourself you just have to get out of the house, get away from the business?
Well, I do have an outside activity, so that does keep me from being home every day. I do get out, yes.
And there is times that you're just not in the mood, and it's
No.
kind of hard to get into.
Yes, it is. That does happen, yes.
What's your position in the company?
I mostly take care of the books. I am not a designer, and I forgot what I wish to be.
Do you have a title?
Well, it's called vice president.
Vice President. That's very good. Very good. You have a very lovely home here,
Thank you very much.
and this has been a very lovely interview. Do you have anything else you'd like to tell about your family or anything? If not, we'll draw this to a close.
Well, I think it was.
The History Center would like to thank you very much, the Linn County Historical Society, for sharing your memories and the memories of your dad and your mother with us, George. Thank you very much, and Geraldine, has been very nice to meet you.
Well, you're very welcome. We've enjoyed it.